Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
All right. So last week we began a journey, pun intended there, I guess, or reference there, because we started talking about the exodus of our people out of Egypt. We hadn't gotten that far yet, but we talked about a little bit about the early life of. Actually, I guess it was before the early life of Moses. We talked about how we multiplied so abundantly. We were so blessed by our Creator. We multiplied to the point that when a Pharaoh came to power who did not know Yusuf, who did not know the blessings of being with Israel, he saw us as a threat. And he said, what if they rise up as an army? Or what if they join the side of our enemy? We would be so outnumbered. And so his solution was to kill off baby boys. Okay? And this, I've been argued with when I say this because for years I said this was the equivalent in their time of forced abortion. Okay? I said the government said that a certain class of people could not reproduce males, they would be killed. And I had people argue with me and say, there's no such thing as a post-birth abortion. And you shouldn't make a comparison to the two. And I kept making the comparison. And now we have, in some places, people who are doing post-birth abortions. Okay? The child actually breathes air and cries before it is killed. And I know there are people who make the argument, well, it's not until the child breathes that he's really alive. It's the breath of life concept. Okay? Anyone who has ever made that argument, as flawed as the argument was to begin with, because it's like day 4 after conception that you can find a heartbeat. Okay? If you know what you're looking for. And as flawed as that argument was, it all stood on their premise that until the child breathes, it's not a living. Well, now they're murdering, and I will say it, as politically incorrect as it is, I will say they are murdering little children at the moment of their births. And every Jewish person, even if you allowed yourself to be convinced of that other argument about breath of life, every Jewish person should mourn the fact that we live in a society, it's not yet being mandated that these partial birth or post-birth abortions be done, but they're being allowed. And that's the first step. And then it'll be normalized. People will get numb to it, just like they did to, quote unquote, what I would call regular abortion, the prenatal abortion. Until we get to the point that somebody in the government or otherwise can come along and say, all y'all have to, if you're carrying a male child or female, whatever they want to do, when it's born, you have to kill it. We're only a step away, people, from where Israel was under the Mitzrayim when Moshe was born. One step away. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levine woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. Okay, so she took a basket and she made it waterproof, is basically what's going on here. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moshe, explaining, "I drew him out of the water." Now, I want you to stop and think about this, because we've all seen this depicted, right? We've seen it in the Ten Commandments. We've seen it in the Prince of Egypt. We've seen it in stage plays. And I want you to really think about what it's saying here. Number one, this mother loved her child so much that she risked her own life to save his life. You know what else that means? That means his father also loved that child so much that he risked his life to save the child's life. Okay? That's not mentioned in here, but it goes without saying, I think. Because obviously this was a woman of the Levim married to a Levi. And she took this basket, she took something that she had and destroyed it. When she waterproofed that wicker basket, she made it useless for its original purpose. You know, when I teach search and rescue, I teach wilderness survival, I have a saying someone told me a long time ago. I wish I knew who said it. I can't remember where I got it, but I use it all the time when I teach those classes, and I think it applies here. Nothing has found its purpose until it's been repurposed. Okay? Nothing, if I can take a 9-volt battery and use it as a fire starter, the 9-volt battery may not power anything that I have out there in the field. But if I can take it and use it to start a fire, it might keep me alive. Okay, that's just one of many examples. A bottle of water can also start a fire. That's a whole other thing. What is going on here is our Creator is using this woman, this faithful woman of the Levim, to start his fire. At this point, being of Israel, yes, we had grown in number. We had amassed great numbers. But most of those people, they were being raised up in a blend. Some of them, they were learning the faithful, true religion of our history, of our heritage. They were also learning the pagan customs of the Mitzrayim, and probably the pagan customs of other slaves who were brought in and intermixed with them. So much so that later on we're going to read about a mixed multitude that goes out of Mitzrayim. Okay? But he took this faithful woman and showed her that if she would destroy something of value, sacrifice something of value, she would have a chance to save something greater. And she put her child in that basket that she had sealed up and put it on the river. And in the movies, they always show her telling his sister, go, watch, see what happens to my son. Scripture doesn't say that. It says that his sister went and stationed herself there. You know what that tells me? It tells me that both the mother and the daughter had great faith. But the mother had faith that she was going to entrust Elohim to protect her son. She didn't have to know the result. She prayed over him and sent him off. And the sister does the same thing, but she has to see what Elohim is going to do. And which is the greater faith? I've actually heard this debated intensely by some of the Rebbeim. Okay, who had the greater faith? Was it the mother or the sister? Because the mother says, I don't need to know what happens. I know Elohim will take care of him. And you can read it and say, well, then the sister had to see. But there's also the argument that maybe the sister had to see because the sister knew that if she watched, she would see a miracle. Okay, so I've heard Rabbi put down his sister and say, well, she should have had faith like her mother. I personally lean toward the other end of the argument. In my first book that I wrote, The Battle Lines of Faith, I talk about people who pray and pray and pray and ask for something from heaven, a blessing or something, a miracle to happen, and then they get up and they walk away and they don't wait. And later on they're like, but I never saw him work in my life. And everybody around them is like, but you prayed right here and this happened, and they weren't there to see it. I'm not saying you have to be the sister in your faith walk and demand to see or insist upon staying and seeing what's done from your prayer. But I'm saying if your faith is the faith of the mother, don't assume that he hasn't answered because you didn't see it. And so the basket comes down the Nile. And the daughter of Pharaoh's out there. This is another one the movies always get wrong. They always say it was his sister, and Moshe grew up as the Pharaoh's nephew. Almost every version I've ever seen. He actually was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. Okay? So they're just to get you a clear picture of what's going on there. So Pharaoh's daughter takes him and she sees with her own eyes. You know, in the movies, they always make it out, she didn't know this was a Hebrew child. And somebody had to come along later and say, don't say that, tell the Pharaoh what you've done because this is against his edict. But what does it say she did? She takes him and says, this must be a Hebrew child. And yet, there is no indication in Scripture that she hesitated. There's no inkling of anything saying, well, should I go against my father's edict? Or should I do what he says and have this child killed? No. Instantly, she looked at that child, and with that inborn, I would say a maternal instinct that was ignited there by Elohim in that moment, she said, I'm going to keep this boy. I'm going to raise him as my own. But then the sister comes along. A result of her waiting to see what was done with her prayer. And she says, do you want me to find a Hebrew nursemaid Okay? Because Egyptian women, from what I've read, Egyptian women, Mizrahi women at that time did not tend to nurse their own children for whatever reason. I've read different theories as to why it was. Okay, so they would have slaves, like the Hebrews, like our people. They would have women from the slaves who had children who they were nursing also nurse their children. And so this was not an unusual thing for her to want another woman to nurse her child. But the sister comes along and presents and says, I can go find a woman who can nurse his child for you. Pharaoh's daughter says, sure, go do that, because that's the normal thing here. Who does she go get? She goes and gets her mother, the baby's mother, Moshe's mother. And I want you to pay close attention to something it says here. It's another one the movies and most preachers I've heard get wrong. It says, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. Okay? So, not only did she get to keep her son from death by her faith, her son became known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Therefore, he could live there among the Hebrew people and not be at risk of death. And the royal house that was going to have him killed paid her for taking care of him. How many blessings came from that one act of trust, that one act of faith? When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. They never show it that way. It's always depicted that he had no clue who he was. That all of a sudden, at about age 40, he finds out that he's a Hebrew. That's not what Scripture says. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. He grew up knowing Hebrew. He grew up knowing the Torah. He grew up knowing everything that a son of Ben Levi, a son of the Levine, would know. If you ask me, that changes the story a whole lot. Because he goes from being, as it's always depicted by Hollywood, this hidden, secret priest. That's what the Levi are, they're priests. He goes from being that and growing up pagan and suddenly having this experience where he finds out who he really is, to being a man who grew up knowing who he really was, but also lived out under the agreement that was made between his mother and his birth mother and his adopted mother, that when he reached a certain age, he would come and become the son, known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the grandson of Pharaoh. Verse 11. Sometime after that, when Moshe had grown up, so this is interesting because in the previous verses, it says when he grew up, he was taken to the Pharaoh's daughter. Now it says when he had grown up. And what I think was probably going on here, and this is just my take on it, is that Coming from Torah, there are two. There's being a young man. There's being a man. Okay, and you're not considered fully a man for a lot of purposes until you're 20. But you're also not considered to be a man for a lot of purposes until you're 30. I shouldn't say a lot, several purposes until you're 30. How old was he? I don't know. I guess, and this is just a guesstimation, okay, based upon other things I've studied out, he was probably in his tween years or early teen years when he went to live in Pharaoh's palace. Meaning that his formative years, his fundamental upbringing was with his Hebrew people. And it says when he grew up, because we're reading from Torah, we're not reading from the Mitzrayim thinking, we're reading from Torah. It says when he grew up, I'm thinking probably when he reached 20, when he became a man for most purposes. It says he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw a Mitzrayim beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. Now, I'm going to tell you about a little word study I did years ago, and some scholars would argue against this. Some I found actually believe what I'm about to say. He saw a Mitzrayim beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. All of the Hebrews were his kinsmen, right? It's like all Hebrews are our kinsmen, right? Okay, all of Israel is a family. But this word for kinsman in the Hebrew, I believe, in this context, indicates that it wasn't just someone of the nation, it was someone of his tribe, possibly someone of his household. I'm going to take the more moderate kind of middle ground there and say this is probably someone of the Levim. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Mitzrayim and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" He retorted, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian, killed the Mitzrayim?" Think about this. He's the grandson of Pharaoh, right? But the other Hebrews know that he's a Hebrew. They were all Middle Eastern. Yes, they talks about a dark-skinned Pharaoh, but it probably wasn't a whole lot darker than what Moshe would have been. The concept of race based upon skin pigment is actually a relatively new thing compared to the age of the Torah. How did this man know to ask him that question? Who made you chief and ruler over us? He knew him because he'd watched him grow up. Because he wasn't a toddler, just weaned, when he went to live with Pharaoh's daughter. Moshe was frightened and thought, then the matter is known. When Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moshe, but Moshe fled from Pharaoh. You know, that's another one they get wrong in the movies. In the movies, he kills him and he runs away. Almost every version I've ever seen. Occasionally you see a version where somebody else figures it out and tells Pharaoh, and then he's condemned and he runs away, or he's sent away as punishment. That's a real miss of the mark right there. He wasn't sent away as punishment. He ran away to avoid being punished. Some would ask why I make such a big deal out of the differences between this and what we see portrayed. And my reasoning hinges on this. We tend to believe what we see portrayed and bring it over and superimpose it upon the scripture. We have to be leery of that because we see things portrayed in the media all the time that is not true to scripture, and it doesn't just have to be biblical stories. We can have people. My father-in-law told me he saw this. I never saw it, but it was an interview with some famous people and very ungodly people. If you look at how they live their lives, and by ungodly there, I'm using the Torah as a standard. And they asked one person, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I believe in God. I'm a Christian." And after that, there were news articles and magazine articles about how this guy had come out about his Christian faith. Yes, I know we're all Jewish here. Okay, and the mainline church, even though we're Messianic, the mainline church does not accept us any more than mainline Judaism accepts us. They each think we're on the other side. But I bring this up because those same famous people could have been asked, "Are you any other religion? Are you Jewish?" And if they had said, "Well, yeah, I believe there's a God. I must be Jewish," the masses would have bought it. And they would have said, "Well, the way that guy's living, that must be how a good Jew lives." The sad thing is there are ethnic Jews who are not observant, who are very famous, who go around pronouncing that they are Jews. And the world looks and says, "Oh, that's what a Jew is." Trying to think exactly how her question was asked. My sister-in-law asked me a week or so ago about a professing Jewish group and some of their liberal stances, and she says, "I guess you're not involved in any of that, are you?" And I said, "Absolutely not." She said, "Well, I was kind of curious because she's new to understanding a lot of our beliefs." And she said, I didn't think that was something you would stand for, but they said they were Jewish." You see, people have superimposed what the culture says is right on top of what the Torah says is right. Okay? And so they're taking those principles of what they think is righteousness based upon the world's position, and they're saying we're going to be righteous, but they're being righteous, quote unquote, according to the world's standard, and they're ignoring Elohim's standard. And that begins when we let them tell us what the Torah says instead of studying it for ourselves. He arrived in the land of Midian. And sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock, but shepherds came and drove them off. Moshe rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They answered, "A Mitzrayim rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." Why did they think he was a Mitzrayim? Did he tell them he was from Mitzrayim? Or was he still bearing the symbolage, wearing the clothes and the jewelry and what have you that would have gone along with being the adopted grandson of Pharaoh? We have to watch what we look like. And no, it's not about keeping up appearances. Okay, keeping up appearances does not make us righteous, but if we're living righteous lives, we should keep up the appearance. It should just go along with it. A lot of times it does. I've been walking down the street, walking through a store, and people ask me, "Are you a Messianic Jew?" Yes, I am. Why do you ask? Well, aren't you the only sect of Judaism that still actually keeps the blue cord in their tassels? Well, yes, we are. Are you Jewish? Yes, I am. How do you know? Because you always turn down overtime on Saturdays. Are you a Jew? As a matter of fact, yes. How did you know? Well, because I've noticed this, or that, or the other. We are called to be a separate and peculiar people. One of the greatest compliments I've ever had is when someone I worked with told me, "Philip, you're a great guy, but you're really kind of strange." And I said, "By strange, do you mean peculiar?" And the answer was yes. Yes, I guess that's the right word, peculiar. And I said, "Thank you." And this person said, "Why? Why would you thank me for saying that?" And I said, "Because my God commands me to be peculiar." We can't go around looking like Mitzrayim, because it won't matter that we water the flock. The people of Midian will think that we're Mitzrayim, because that's what we look like. We can't go around looking like the world, because it won't matter what good thing we do. If they think we represent the world, they will miss who we really represent. He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to break bread." Moshe consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moshe his daughter Zipporah as wife. You know, they always make it out that all the daughters were after him, and he was into all the daughters. And then there was some sort of contest, or something stirred in him, and he said, "Oh, forget all of them," and he married Zipporah. None of that is told to us in Torah. He demonstrated that he was not of the Mitzrayim. He demonstrated that he was a Hebrew in the time that he lived with this man, and this man gave to him his daughter. She bore a son whom he named Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Gershom. You know, we talk about people who come to us from the outside who want to, quote unquote, convert. Okay, and I hate that term, because it's not I made a decision today and now I'm a Jew for the rest of my life. Okay, that's how the mainline church is like, make a decision today and you're okay forever. Doesn't matter what you do. You can rob, steal, rape, kill. It doesn't matter. Because you said a prayer today. We heard you. One of the things that drew me to this journey that I am on is that it is a journey. Because everything I saw in Scripture was men and women having faith journeys, not faith moments, not faith decisions. Yeah, there are some of those, but then it talks about those same people having faith journeys. And Shaul talked about, you come into the faith and you're a babe in the faith and you need milk and you need water. And when you're mature, you need the meat of the message. He talked about no longer being a faith, but being being a babe in the faith, but being a father in the faith. And yet in all the mainline churches I was ever in, there was a point. Old friend of mine calls it the goalpost. There was a point that you reached and, okay, now you're mature. And it was like you were encouraged to stop studying, stop learning. That same friend who tells me the standard is a goalpost, his family, because a lot of things happened and they moved from church to church to church as he was growing up, and he was always trying to figure out what is it to be a Christian. And he said that to him, Christianity, he is now a professing atheist, by the way. He says that Christianity to him, because he quote unquote got saved like 10 times. No, that's not possible. I understand that. But as a kid, he would go from church to church to church, and every time he got there, they would tell him a different standard for what it was to be a Christian by their view. And he would live up to it, and then they would move to a different church, and there'd be a different goalpost. And he said for him, Christianity was a perpetual game of goalpost moving. Let us as Jews never settle for the day, the decision of the day, and let us never be guilty of goalpost moving. And the only way we're going to do that is to say, here's the goalpost, the Torah. And we're never going to reach it. But we're going to keep pushing for it. Because when these ger come to us, that's what got me started on this Gershon, stranger in a foreign land. We talk about the goy, the outsider, and then there's the toshav, the stranger, who dwells among us, and there's the ger toshav, okay, who's like a resident alien. They're not us, they're not Yisrael, but they live as they're learning, they're growing, they're seeing the beauty in the Torah, and they're applying aspects of it to their lives. That's the ger toshav. And then the ger is the person who, although they are goy by their bloodline and by their upbringing, they are a ger. They're the stranger, the foreigner who has dwelled among us, to the point that if somebody on the outside looks at them, they don't know that they're from the outside. They look at them and they believe that they are Ezrach, native born. They believe that is a Jew from birth, because they've changed themselves so much to be in alignment with his word. So much so the Torah says that after they reach that point, if they are ger, then if they will come, and at that point, if they've been circumcised, if they're men, and they will eat the Passover, that we are to treat them as though they are Ezrach. And any children that they have after that point will be considered Ezrach, even if they don't have a single drop of the blood of Yisrael in their veins. They will be treated as his descendants and counted so by Elohim. We are Gershon. Okay, because we are strangers in a foreign land right now. We are not in Eretz Yisrael. We are in the United States of America. And I don't care what anybody tells you. There are people who say, "Oh, if you're an American Jew, that's just as good as being going home to Israel, because this is the other promised land." There is nothing in Scripture that says anything about another promised land. Nothing. We are in diaspora. Even though we are in diaspora in the country that is most likely to permit us to continue worshiping as commanded, we are still in diaspora. We're still in Mitzrayim, we're still in Babylon, we're still in Rome. It's just got a different name, it's on a different part of the earth. That hasn't changed. We need to remember that. And never put on the garb of Pharaoh's grandson. When we come to the well and we do good and righteous things for the stranger, they need to be able to look at us and the way we live our lives and say, "Oh, that's Gershom. That's the stranger in our foreign land. He's not one of us. She's not one of us. But they're good and righteous people, and I want to know why." And then they'll come thirsty and hungry for the word. A long time after that, the king of Mitzrayim died. The Yisraelim were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from the bondage rose up to Elohim. Elohim heard their moaning, and Elohim remembered his covenant with Abraham and Yitzhak and Yaakov. Elohim looked upon the Yisraelim, and Elohim took notice of them. A lot of people read that and think, they take that, well, he remembered his covenant. So they say, well, he must have forgotten about us for a time. I don't know about you, but I don't serve a divine being who forgets about me. I serve a divine being who always has me in his thoughts. I serve a divine being who says that my people, Yisrael, are the apple of his eye. He never forgot his covenant. And this is one of the places where the mainstream church gets way out there, in my opinion, on their doctrine, okay, and says, well, that covenant failed, and there's a new covenant, and we got to take this new covenant because the first one failed, and this one's perfect. The first one was perfect, folks. The covenant didn't fail. Yehovah did not fail. The people failed. But in his covenant with the people, with our ancestors, with the patriarchs, he said, if you have done this, if you've wandered away from my covenant and you're suffering under bondage because you're not in the covenant with me like you're supposed to be, when you realize this and you cry out to me, turning away from the things of the world back to the covenant, I will come and I will deliver you. He never forgot the covenant. He remembered it all along. And part of that was remembering the standard that we have to meet. Turn away from the things of the world and cling to him.